Our scripture reading takes us back to the book of Proverbs. And now I will be reading from Proverbs chapter 4, found on page 576, if you would like to follow along. Page 576, Proverbs chapter 4, and I will be reading verses 1 through 5 and then 10 through 15. Listen, children, to a father's instruction, and be attentive that you might gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender and my mother's favorite, he taught me and said to me, "Let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget nor turn away." And now at verse 10, "Hear, my child, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away. Turn away from it and pass on. Amen. Well, today is Family Day here at the church, and we can all benefit by being reminded of some of the ancient life principles. There are so many choices in life. There are so many different roads we can choose to take. How will a child know which is the best way to travel? The Scottish Presbyterian scholar William Barclay would often take the train from Glasgow to London. And of course, he preferred to take the express train because it was quicker. It did not stop at any of the stations in between. Because people would sometimes make the mistake of getting on the wrong train, the conductor would make extraordinary efforts to be clear that this was the express train. He would walk through car after car, announcing that this is the express train. This train will stop in London, and that's it. If you take this train, you will end up in London. Well, wouldn't it be nice if all of life were so straightforward? Wouldn't it be nice to know in advance just where each of our life decisions will eventually take us? I mean, even the books we read, the habits we pick up, the things we choose for recreation can all have an influence. They can all have consequences we could never have anticipated. Christian country music artist Josh Turner has a song you can watch on YouTube called "The Long Black Train." And the basic theme is, watch out for that long black train, because it's the devil's train, and you're not going to like where it takes you. Our decisions all have consequences. But as children, if no one warns us, or if our pride makes us think that we can just do whatever we want, where will we end up? How unwelcome a word of warning can be, particularly to a teenager, if it comes from someone in authority. But if we have the humility to listen, it can save us from a lot of hurt. Now, of course, the world has changed a lot since Bible times, but many of the precepts and principles remain the same. Recently, the airways have been just flooded with ads for online gambling. You don't even have to leave your recliner. You hardly have to lift a finger to gamble. And to get you hooked, they guarantee that you will win. Oh, think of the glamour and the excitement and being able to brag to your friends about how much you've won. Companies are spending millions of dollars on advertising, and they are certain that at the end of the day, they will be making money. Your money. But the Bible warns us about the temptation of making a quick buck, and warns about so-called friends who will try to draw you into their get-rich schemes for just a modest investment. Who better than your family? Who better than the people who care about you and love you to warn you about where these roads may lead? The writer of Ecclesiastes wrote, "There is a time for every purpose under heaven." Actor Rob Lowe was one of the stars of the television show The West Wing, which of course was a show about the White House and the work that went on there. And one of the really great moments in his life came when he was able to take his little sons to the real White House, to the real Oval Office, and introduce them to the President of the United States. Unfortunately, our children and grandchildren have different interests and priorities. They do not always want to share our perspective of what is really important in life. There Mr. Lowe was introducing his sons to the president when the boy suddenly broke away, rushed over the windows shouting, "Dad, Dad, look, they have squirrels! There's squirrels here!" And how often many of you have had that same experience, discovering your kids were completely on a different page than you were. When Kim and I took our girls to Washington, they were little kids, but the highlight of that was looking down in one of the great reflecting pools, and someone had lost a sneaker, and it was down under the water. Oh my goodness, you just would have thought that was it. That made the whole vacation, seeing a sneaker. And I'm sure many of you have had those kinds of experiences with your kids. One of the most important gifts we can give to our children is time. If we're watching TV, we can mute the commercials and talk about the decisions that the characters are making. I bet we've all visited restaurants and passed tables where an entire family is sitting around and every single one of them is on their own device. They're physically together, but they're all independently off in their own worlds. I find that so sad. Spend time together, even doing chores, doing the necessary work of keeping a home. How about taking a walk together? And that's always an amazing adventure because the grandkids are always so interested in things that I don't really care about. I don't even look at. And boy, they're over there playing with an ant colony. They see where the ants are going down. That's the greatest thing in the world for them. And how they draw me in to enjoy and share it as well. Back when I was in seminary, I had a New Testament professor who once told us of how his father used to beat his mother. Oh, his father gave every appearance of being a fine Christian man. He was a pillar in the local church. But when things did not go his way, he would smack his wife around. just as his father had before him. Even as a child, this boy knew what he was seeing was wrong and that Jesus would never approve of it. We have to ask ourselves, what are the examples we are giving our children on what it means to be a spouse or what it means to be a parent? For better and for worse, we are setting the example for the next generation. We are setting the model for what they're going to be looking for in a spouse, should they marry. It takes real introspection to say, I am going to be different from my parents. Certain attitudes, certain actions will stop here and not be passed along to the next generation. Back in the Victorian era, children were expected to be obedient and honest and hardworking and emotionally self-contained and able to keep a stiff upper lip and not cry no matter what calamity might befall them. Hardships, disappointments were considered a part of life, and they believed that children needed to be toughened up and have a strong character to face the bad times of life. One man with 11 children left instructions with the servants that breakfast would only be served to the first 10 in order to discourage dawdling and tardiness. A woman recalled not being allowed to put sugar on her porridge the way her parents did, nor was she allowed to put jam on her bread under the theory that anything so tasty would simply wreck her moral fiber. English private schools of that era really embraced the theory that pain and deprivation would build character. Flogging of the children was common in those days, sometimes twice a day. Not being flogged, wow, that was a cause for celebration. One boy wrote home happily, "This week I did much better with my arithmetic. I didn't get flogged once." Whoa, what a different paradigm than what we are probably accustomed to. In the movie, The Sound of Music, the father, who was once a captain in the Navy, trained his children to respond to a boat whistle. And they would come marching out and line up, and they would spend time every afternoon marching. It was a very logical, a very disciplined approach that he believed was preparing his children for real life. And perhaps some of you were raised that way. If you want your children to keep their feet on the ground, put some responsibility on their shoulders. I mean, we've probably all heard those kinds of lines. We've all perhaps, been raised that way. And there is truth in that. But in her famous poem, Children Learn What They Live, Dorothy Nolte wrote, "If children are living with criticism, they learn to condemn. If they're growing up with hostility, then they learn to fight. If they're living with ridicule, then they learn to be shy. If they are living with shame, then they're going to learn to feel guilty. But if children live with encouragement, then they learn confidence. If children learn tolerance, then they in turn learn to be patient. If they live with praise, they learn to appreciate. They live with acceptance. They learn to love. With approval, they learn to like themselves. With honesty, they learn truthfulness. With security, they learn to have faith in themselves and others. With friendliness, They learn the world can be a nice place in which to live. Children have a need for love and for laughter and for friendship. Yes, there is also a need to develop self-discipline and good habits. How do they learn these qualities? Well, watching us is very important. Of course, our influence will be limited by the amount of time we get to spend with them, but whether parent or grandparent or relative or through some involvement in a youth program, our example will be seen. It may not be followed, but it will be noted. So what is your attitude regarding your employment? Is work something just hateful and odious? Some people treat it like a game where they try to get as much as possible for as little effort as possible. Is your job just a means to survive and accumulate more stuff? If you're lucky, at least some of the time you spend at work will provide opportunities where you can use your gifts and talents in a way that feels really good. I was talking with a man this past week, as a matter of fact, who had worked as a punch press operator when they decided to shut down the local plant. And they offered to transfer him to another one of their plants in Tennessee. But with the stipulation, he must work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Oh, man. He needed the job. What could he do? Well, he took the job. He did work those outrageous, inhumane hours. He survived until he retired. But boy, what a tough way to live. Aesop once told a fable about some honey that got spilled on a windowsill, and it wasn't long before the flies came to eat the honey. Oh, it was delicious honey. They loved it, and the flies began to eat all they could. But in their greed and in their haste, the honey began to get smeared around on their delicate wings and their feet, and eventually they found themselves stuck and they couldn't get away. So many jobs can be a trap like that. Changing jobs often means a loss of benefits or a reduction in vacation time or moving the kids to a different school district. You get a job, you get a paycheck. The next thing you're dreaming of what could be purchased. Maybe a car, maybe a house. Next thing you know, you have payments that have to be made. Next thing you know, you're stuck. What is the example we are setting with our marriage? Is it seasoned with fault-finding and nitpicking? Is it like a game of rock'em sock'em robots? Or is there sensitivity and listening, service and sacrifice done in love? There's a piece I sometimes use at weddings that goes, when God created man and placed him in the Garden of Eden, God saw it was not good for him to be alone. So God prepared a helper and a companion. And in this act of creation, God didn't take the woman from the man's head, lest he should rule over her, nor from his feet, lest he should trample upon her, but from his side, that they should be equal, from close to his heart, that they should love and cherish one another. Marriage is God's good gift to deliver us from isolation and from loneliness, but it's not always pleasant or easy. Certainly not for the faint of heart. And sometimes marriages can become destructive and demeaning, and another way forward must be found. But by our choices, We are setting the example. We're building the model of what a marriage looks like to our children and grandchildren. And we are creating for them a set of expectations of what normal looks like. Are we setting the right example of a healthy relationship by really listening, by compromising, by putting forth the time and effort that is necessary for there to be a good relationship? And what is the example of our Christian faith? Is it only seen at 10:30 on Sunday morning when we sometimes attend church? Or is it a daily surrendering of your ego and your life to God's purposes? Are you interested in being led by God's purposes? What happens if we stop exercising? What happens if we stop eating? What happens if we stop breathing? Are we giving our faith more than just a passing glance? It has the potential to be a very powerful influence in our lives. Are we sharing that with our children? Well, let me stop there and ask you to join with me in reflecting upon these two questions. What sort of example am I setting? And are there things in my life that God would like me to change? We'll take just a minute to reflect quietly upon those questions.